She was carrying 4 heavy plates on her left arm when it happened. The rich man was laughing at her, making fun of her right there in front of all his fancy friends. He thought it would be funny to ask the waitress, just some nobody serving coffee, what she thought about his huge $40 billion business deal. He was just being mean, trying to show off. But then she said something that made everyone at that table freeze up. 5 simple words that would bring down everything this corrupt man had built. 5 words that would flip both their worlds upside down forever. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "You're being set up." That billionaire had no clue who he was really dealing with. The woman pouring his coffee? She used to control billions and billions of dollars with just the click of a button. She had been one of the smartest money people in the whole country. That is, until the very man he was about to shake hands with completely ruined her life and forced her to go into hiding. Now, here she was, 3 long years later, finally ready to get him back. And oh boy, was it going to be sweet revenge, the kind that would make your heart pound with excitement. The silence stretched across the dining room like a taut wire. Richard Sterling's wine glass hovered halfway to his lips, frozen in the amber light of the crystal chandelier. His 3 guests, Daniel, Margaret, and Charles, sat motionless, their perfectly manicured hands gripping their silverware as if anchoring themselves to reality. Elena Grant stood beside their table, coffee pot still in hand, watching the color drain from Richard's face. She had thrown down the gauntlet with 5 simple words, and now the consequences would unfold like dominoes falling in precise sequence. "Excuse me?" Richard's voice carried the edge of a man who wasn't accustomed to being contradicted by anyone, let alone service staff. Elena set the coffee pot down with deliberate care. Her movements were economical, purposeful, nothing like the deferential gestures expected from someone in her uniform. "The Vertex Technologies acquisition. Vincent Calloway is positioning you for a controlled demolition." Daniel Sterling snorted, breaking the tension with his familiar arrogance. "Uncle, are you seriously going to let some waitress—" "Shut up!" Richard's command cut through his nephew's protest like a blade. His pale blue eyes remained fixed on Elena, studying her with the intensity of a predator recognizing another apex hunter. "Continue." Elena glanced toward the restaurant's entrance, noting the placement of security cameras and exit routes, habits ingrained from 3 years of careful living. The other diners continued their conversations, oblivious to the financial earthquake about to reshape Chicago's skyline. "Vincent's been building Phoenix Holdings through 17 shell companies across 3 jurisdictions," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "The Vertex deal isn't just overpriced. It's designed to trigger a cascade failure in your investment portfolio within 60 days of closing." Margaret Whitfield, Richard's longtime attorney, leaned forward. "That's quite an accusation from someone who—" "Someone who what?" Elena's dark eyes flashed. "Someone who pours coffee? Someone who remembers when Vincent Calloway testified before Congress that algorithmic trading couldn't be manipulated for insider fraud?" The legal advisor's mouth clicked shut. Elena's reference was surgical in its precision. Vincent's 2019 testimony had been sealed from public records, accessible only to someone with intimate knowledge of federal financial investigations. Richard set his wineglass down with the careful control of a man reassessing everything he thought he knew. "You have 30 seconds to convince me you're not insane." Elena pulled out her phone, fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Phoenix Holdings' registered address is 1247 Meridian Street, Suite 4A. Empty office. The incorporation papers list Sarah Chen as the managing director. She died in a car accident 14 months ago. The filing attorney, Marcus Webb, was disbarred for money laundering 3 weeks after Phoenix was established." She turned the phone screen toward Richard. The documentation was there, Corporate filings, death certificates, bar association records, all cross-referenced with the methodical precision of someone who understood how financial deception operated at its highest levels. Charles Morrison, the oldest of Richard's dinner companions, squinted at the small text. These could be fabricated. They could be, Elena agreed, but Vincent's pattern is consistent. He did the same thing to Hamilton and Associates in Seattle, Meridian Capital in Dallas, and Blackstone Ventures in Miami. Each time, the target firm discovered the manipulation approximately 8 weeks after the fraudulent acquisition closed, exactly when the damage became irreversible. Richard's breathing had changed, becoming shallow and controlled. Elena recognized the signs. She had seen them in her own reflection during those final days at Pinnacle Analytics, when the walls were closing in, and the magnitude of Vincent's betrayal became clear. "You know about the other firms," he said slowly. "I know Vincent Calloway destroys everything he touches." Elena's voice carried 3 years of carefully contained fury. "The question is whether you want to be his next victim or his next obstacle." Daniel laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Uncle, this is ridiculous. Vincent's a respected—" Vincent Calloway framed Elena Rodriguez for securities fraud in 2019. The words came out before Elena could stop them, emerging from some deep well of exhaustion she hadn't realized existed. Elena Rodriguez, who built the Phoenix algorithm that revolutionized predictive market analysis. Elena Rodriguez, who trusted her mentor completely until he used her own code to steal $47 million and destroy her career. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Elena felt simultaneously lighter and more vulnerable than she had in years. Richard's eyes widened with recognition, not just of her name, but of the implications. "Elena Rodriguez disappeared," Margaret whispered. "The FBI investigation concluded she had fled the country with stolen funds. Elena Rodriguez is standing right here, pouring your coffee, and watching Vincent Calloway prepare to do to Sterling Investments exactly what he did to Pinnacle Analytics." Elena's hands remained steady, but her voice carried the weight of 3 years spent rebuilding herself from nothing. The same algorithm, the same shell companies, the same precise timeline for maximum devastation. Richard pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the marble floor. For a moment, Elena thought he might call security, might dismiss her as a delusional former employee seeking revenge through elaborate fantasies. Instead, he stood slowly, his movements deliberate and predatory. "My office. Now." Elena shook her head. "Too exposed. Vincent has people throughout your organization. Patricia Hayes in risk management, Gerald Thompson in your CFO's office. They've been feeding him intelligence for months. Patricia Hayes has worked for me for 8 years." Patricia Hayes received a cash payment of $200,000 from Phoenix Holdings subsidiary Meridian Financial Services on March 15th. Gerald Thompson's daughter's medical bills are being paid through a scholarship fund that traces back to another Phoenix shell company. Elena's voice carried the clinical precision of someone who had spent months mapping every connection. Vincent doesn't buy loyalty. He buys necessity. Charles Morrison was studying Elena with renewed interest. "You've been investigating Sterling Investments." "I've been investigating Vincent Calloway. Sterling is just his latest target." Elena glanced toward the restaurant's kitchen entrance, calculating distances and timing. "He's probably already initiated the next phase, the one where he positions himself as your savior after the Vertex deal starts hemorrhaging money." Richard's face had gone ashen. "What next phase?" "Vincent will offer to buy your distressed assets at 30 cents on the dollar, restructure your debt through Phoenix Holdings, and emerge as Sterling's majority stakeholder within 6 months. Elena's explanation was methodical, each detail building toward the inevitable conclusion. You'll retain a ceremonial position while he systematically strips every valuable asset from your portfolio. The restaurant's ambient noise seemed to fade as the weight of Elena's revelations settled over the table. Margaret was scrolling through her phone, presumably attempting to verify the claims about Patricia Hayes and Gerald Thompson. Daniel sat in stunned silence, his usual smugness replaced by growing comprehension of the magnitude of their situation. "You said you've been investigating for months," Richard said carefully. "How long have you known about the Vertex deal?" "Vincent's been planning this specific operation for 18 months. I've been tracking the preliminary moves since I learned Phoenix Holdings was targeting firms with your investment profile." Elena's admission was strategic, revealing enough to establish credibility while maintaining operational security. The Vertex announcement accelerated his timeline. "And you've been working here, in my restaurant, this entire time?" "I've been working here for 14 months, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid detection." Elena's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. Vincent's arrogance made him predictable. He assumes everyone he's destroyed stays destroyed. Richard's phone buzzed against the table. The caller ID displayed Vincent Calloway's name and Sterling Investments' main number. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Vincent's timing was either coincidental or catastrophically precise. "Don't answer it," she said quickly. Richard's finger hovered over the screen. "Why not?" "Because Patricia Hayes just sent him a message about unusual activity in your personal dining reservations. Vincent knows something's changed." Elena's explanation came in rapid, clipped sentences. "If you take that call, he'll probe for information about tonight's conversation. Any deviation from your normal behavior will trigger his contingency protocols." The phone continued buzzing, each vibration seeming to accelerate the gravity of their situation. Margaret was staring at her own device, her face growing paler with each search result. "Patricia Hayes did receive a payment," she whispered. $200,000 from a consulting firm called Meridian Financial Services. Richard let the call go to voicemail, his decision carrying the weight of someone stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. Elena Rodriguez was supposed to be one of the most brilliant financial minds of her generation. Elena Rodriguez was naive enough to trust Vincent Calloway. Elena's response carried equal parts bitterness and determination. Elena Grant learned from that mistake. The distinction was important. Elena Rodriguez had been destroyed by betrayal and institutional manipulation, but Elena Grant had been forged by survival and methodical planning. 3 years of invisibility had taught her patience, precision, and the value of striking from unexpected angles. "What do you want?" Richard's question was direct, cutting through the layers of revelation and strategy to the fundamental transaction at the heart of their interaction. Elena considered her response carefully. She could ask for money, for a position, for revenge against Vincent, delivered on a silver platter. Instead, she chose something far more dangerous and infinitely more valuable. "I want to destroy Vincent Calloway completely." Her voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had spent 3 years planning for this exact moment. "But first, I need to save Sterling Investments. Your survival is necessary for his downfall." Richard's voicemail notification chimed softly. Vincent's message would be waiting, probably urgent and concerned, designed to maintain the illusion of partnership while gathering intelligence about potential threats to his operation. "The Vertex deal closes in 72 hours, Elena continued. "Vincent's already initiated fund transfers through Phoenix Holdings subsidiaries. Once that money moves, tracking it becomes exponentially more difficult. You're talking about preventing a $40 billion acquisition based on the testimony of a wanted fugitive." Charles Morrison's legal training was asserting itself, identifying the practical obstacles to Elena's proposal. "I'm talking about preventing the systematic destruction of a 70-year-old financial institution based on documentary evidence that will convince any federal prosecutor." Elena's correction was sharp and precise. Elena Rodriguez may be legally compromised, but the Phoenix Holdings scheme violates approximately 14 federal statutes related to securities fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. Margaret was still scrolling through search results, her expression growing more troubled with each discovery. Gerald Thompson's daughter does have a rare genetic condition requiring experimental treatment. The costs would be approximately $400,000 annually. PT. Vincent identifies pressure points and applies leverage with surgical precision, Elena explained. Patricia Hayes has a gambling addiction that Vincent's been enabling through controlled losses at specific Chicago casinos. Gerald Thompson's desperation makes him willing to overlook irregularities in Phoenix Holdings documentation. Richard's phone buzzed again. A text message this time. Elena could see Vincent's name on the lock screen, along with the beginning of what appeared to be an urgent communication. He's escalating contact attempts, she observed. Vincent's operational psychology requires confirmation that his targets are behaving predictably. Silence makes him paranoid. Paranoia makes him reckless. And recklessness creates opportunities. Opportunities for what? To catch him in the act. Elena's explanation carried the weight of someone who understood Vincent's methods from intimate experience. Vincent won't abandon the Vertex deal. Too much planning, too much invested capital, too much psychological commitment to the operation. But he will accelerate the timeline if he suspects exposure. Richard finally picked up his phone, reading Vincent's text message with growing tension. His face darkened as he absorbed the contents. He wants to meet tonight. Says there's been a complication with the Vertex documentation that requires immediate attention. Richard looked up at Elena with newfound respect and growing fear. How did you know he would do this? Because Vincent Calloway is predictable when he's threatened. He'll present the meeting as routine business, but he's actually testing whether you've learned something that compromises his operation. Elena's analysis was clinical, delivered with the detached precision of someone describing a laboratory experiment. The question is whether you're ready to help me prove he's the one who should be afraid. The restaurant's closing time activities were beginning around them. Staff clearing tables, dimming lights, preparing for the transition from dinner service to late-night operations. Elena was acutely aware that their window of opportunity was narrowing with each passing minute. "If I help you," Richard said slowly, "what happens to Sterling Investments? Sterling survives, Vincent goes to prison, and you learn that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates." Elena's response carried the confidence of someone who had spent 3 years planning for exactly this conversation. "But if you don't help me, Vincent destroys Sterling just like he destroyed Pinnacle Analytics, and Elena Grant disappears just like Elena Rodriguez did." Noise! Richard's phone buzzed a third time, another call from Vincent Calloway. The persistence was notable, suggesting that whatever intelligence Vincent had received was significant enough to override his usual measured approach to crisis management. Elena watched Richard's face as he weighed his options, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether 3 years of careful preparation would culminate in justice or dissolution. Vincent's call continued ringing, each tone marking another moment closer to a decision that would reshape the financial landscape of Chicago's investment community. The choice, ultimately, was simple. Trust the waitress who knew too much, or trust the mentor who had built his career on destroying everything he touched. Richard Sterling answered the call. "Richard." Vincent's voice cut through the phone with the precision of a scalpel. "I trust you've had time to consider our proposal." Elena watched Richard's knuckles whiten around the device. The billionaire's eyes flicked between her face, and the documents spread across his mahogany desk like tarot cards predicting financial apocalypse. "Vincent, there's been no complications, I hope." The words carried the weight of unspoken threats. The Vertex deal closes tomorrow. $40 billion doesn't wait for cold feet. Richard's jaw worked silently. Elena could practically see the calculations spinning behind his eyes, profit margins warring with self-preservation instincts. 3 years of hiding in plain sight had taught her to read these moments, these hairline fractures where empires either held or shattered. "Actually," Richard said, his voice steadying, "I think we need to discuss Patricia Hayes." Silence stretched across the connection like a tightening wire. "Patricia?" Vincent's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "Whatever could you mean?" Elena leaned forward, her pulse hammering against her throat. This was it. The moment Vincent's carefully constructed facade would either hold or crumble. She'd spent months imagining this conversation, but reality felt sharper, more dangerous than any rehearsal. "She's been feeding you information from inside my company," Richard continued, "about my financial position, my vulnerabilities. The question is, Vincent, how long has my head of risk management been working for you?" The pause lasted exactly 4 seconds. Elena counted them. "Richard, you sound paranoid. Perhaps the stress of this deal—" "The Cayman accounts, Vincent. Phoenix Holdings. Shell companies layered like Russian dolls, each one designed to strip sterling investments down to the bones." Richard's voice gained momentum. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Elena's breath caught. He was doing it, actually confronting the monster who had destroyed her life. But Vincent Calloway hadn't survived 30 years in Chicago's financial district by folding under pressure. "Interesting theory," Vincent said, his tone shifting to something predatory. "Where exactly did you acquire this? Insight?" Richard's eyes found Elena's. The question hung between them like a loaded gun. "Does it matter?" "Oh, it matters very much." Vincent's voice dropped to a whisper. "Especially if someone has been filling your head with fairy tales about Phoenix Holdings. Someone with, shall we say, a personal vendetta?" Elena's blood turned to ice water. "You see, Richard, I've recently discovered that one of my former employees, a brilliant but tragically unstable young woman, has been working in your establishment. Serving coffee, no less. Rather poetic, don't you think?" The color drained from Richard's face. Elena watched him understand, piece by terrible piece, exactly how deep this conspiracy ran. "Elena Rodriguez," Vincent continued, savoring each syllable. "Though I believe she's been calling herself Elena Grant these days. Tell me, Richard, has your waitress been sharing any interesting financial advice lately?" The phone slipped in Richard's grip. Elena felt the walls of her carefully constructed life beginning to collapse. "That's impossible," Richard whispered. "She's just what? Just a waitress?" Vincent's laugh was razor-edged. "Just a woman who can memorize financial statements at a glance? Just someone who can spot fraudulent algorithmic patterns in minutes? Richard, you've been harboring a fugitive." Elena closed her eyes. 3 years of hiding, of building a new identity, one double shift at a time, crumbling in real time. But when she opened them again, something had crystallized in her chest. Not defeat, recognition. This was exactly what Vincent wanted. Fear, confusion, the paralysis that came from feeling completely outmaneuvered. She'd felt it before, 3 years ago, when FBI agents had marched her out of Callaway Investments in handcuffs, when she'd watched her reputation incinerate in news cycles and courtroom proceedings, when she'd discovered that the mentor she'd trusted with everything had been systematically destroying her from the inside. But Elena Rodriguez, the real Elena Rodriguez, had never actually died. She'd just been waiting. "Richard," she said quietly, her voice cutting through Vincent's monologue. "Put the phone on speaker." Richard stared at her. "Are you insane?" "Trust me." Something in her tone made him comply. Vincent's voice filled the office like poison gas. Appreciate you understand the gravity of harboring a known financial criminal. The federal charges alone. Hello, Vincent. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena stood, smoothing her waitress uniform one final time. The black fabric that had been her disguise for 3 years suddenly felt like armor. I was wondering when you'd figure out where I was hiding. Elena. Vincent's voice carried a cocktail of surprise and satisfaction. How lovely to hear from you. Though I have to say, serving coffee seems beneath someone of your former talents. Former? Elena moved to Richard's desk, her fingers dancing across the financial documents. Vincent, you always underestimated me. 3 years ago, when you framed me for your algorithm fraud. 6 months ago, when you thought I wouldn't notice Patricia Hayes accessing Sterling's risk management systems from your Millennium Tower office. And now, when you assume I've been playing defense all this time. She picked up a photograph from Richard's desk, a shot of the Sterling Tower construction project, 48 floors of glass and steel rising from Chicago's financial district. The truth is, Vincent, I've been playing offense for 18 months. Every coffee I served Richard Sterling, every conversation I overheard in the Sterling room, every late night I spent in this building, accessing databases you assumed were secure. Richard was staring at her with something between horror and fascination. You're bluffing, Vincent said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Am I? Elena opened Richard's laptop, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced precision. Tell me, Vincent, when you designed the Phoenix Holdings fraud, did you really think you were being original? The screen filled with financial data, algorithms, money transfer protocols. Because I have to tell you, the underlying code structure looks remarkably familiar. Almost identical, in fact, to something I saw 3 years ago, right before the FBI raided my apartment. Vincent's breathing had become audible through the speaker. The same nested shell company architecture, the same artificial intelligence trading patterns, even the same timing delays in the fund transfers. Elena's voice was steady, almost conversational. It's like looking at a photograph and it's negative. Elena, whatever you think you've discovered, I've discovered that you've been running the same fraud for 6 years, Vincent. The algorithm you used to frame me in 2019? You're using an updated version right now, against Richard, against Vertex Technologies, against every investor foolish enough to trust Phoenix Holdings. The silence stretched like a tightening noose. But here's what you didn't know, Elena continued, her fingers still moving across the keyboard. I kept backups, not just of my own work, of yours too. Every algorithm, every trading pattern, every piece of fraudulent code you used to destroy my life. Richard leaned forward, finally understanding. You can prove it. The connection between the 2019 fraud and Phoenix Holdings. I can prove more than that. Elena's smile was sharp as winter moonlight. I can prove that Vincent Calloway has been running systematic investment fraud for over a decade. The Phoenix Holdings scheme isn't just similar to what he did to me, it's identical. Same criminal methodology, same artificial intelligence patterns, same offshore money laundering protocols. You're talking about federal racketeering charges, Richard whispered. Among other things. Vincent's voice, when it finally came, was different, colder, more dangerous. Elena, you always were too clever for your own good. But you're forgetting something crucial. Am I? Evidence only matters if you're alive to present it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elena felt Richard tense beside her. Are you threatening me, Vincent? I'm stating a fact. You've been dead for 3 years, Elena. Professionally, socially, legally, you don't exist. No one would miss a waitress who disappeared. No one would question if Elena Grant simply stopped showing up for work. Elena's hand found her phone. With practiced movements, She pulled up a recording app. How interesting that you should say that, especially with Richard Sterling listening, and especially given that this entire conversation is being recorded. Recording? Vincent's composure finally cracked. Elena, that's illegal without consent. Illinois is a single-party consent state for recording conversations, Vincent. Basic law. I thought someone with your legal troubles would know that. The silence that followed was deafening. Besides, Elena continued, I think you'll find that threats of physical violence against federal witnesses tend to complicate legal proceedings, even for someone with your connections. Federal witness? Richard's voice was barely a whisper. Elena turned to face him fully. I've been cooperating with the FBI for 8 months, Richard. Every piece of evidence I've gathered about Vincent's fraud, every detail about Phoenix Holdings, every proof of his continued criminal activities. She pulled a business card from her uniform pocket and placed it on the desk. Special Agent Sarah Chen, Financial Crimes Division. Agent Chen has been very interested in Vincent's recent activities, particularly his attempt to defraud Sterling Investments of $40 billion. Vincent's breathing had become ragged through the speaker. You're lying. The same way I was lying about Patricia Hayes? The same way I was lying about Phoenix Holdings? Vincent, when will you learn that I don't bluff? Elena moved to the window, looking out over Chicago's financial district. Lights flickered in dozens of office buildings, each one representing billions of dollars in movement, in trust, in the kind of systematic fraud Vincent had perfected. Here's what's going to happen, she said, her voice steady as steel. In approximately 30 minutes, FBI agents are going to arrest Patricia Hayes as she leaves her office on the 42nd floor. Gerald Thompson will be taken into custody at his Lincoln Park residence. And you, Vincent, are going to surrender yourself to federal authorities within 24 hours. And if I don't? Elena's reflection smiled back at her from the window glass. Then they'll come for you anyway, with enough evidence to ensure you spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Money laundering, wire fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, witness intimidation. Take your pick. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. You always were my best student, Vincent finally said, his voice hollow. No, Vincent, I was your biggest mistake. The line went dead. Elena turned back to Richard, who was staring at her as if seeing her for the first time, which, in many ways, he was. So, she said, smoothing her uniform one final time, do you still want me to bring you that coffee? Richard Sterling, billionaire investor, owner of Sterling Tower and the Sterling Room, sat back in his chair and began to laugh. Not the cruel laughter that had started this entire confrontation, but something else. Recognition, perhaps, or relief. Elena Rodriguez, he said finally. I should have known. Most people miss it. I've gotten very good at being invisible, but you're not invisible anymore. Elena looked down at her waitress uniform, then back at the financial documents scattered across Richard's desk. Evidence of Vincent's crimes, proof of his systematic fraud, the key to everything she'd been working toward for 3 years. No, she said quietly, I don't think I am. Outside the window, Chicago's financial district pulsed with light and ambition. Somewhere in that maze of glass and steel, Vincent Calloway was about to discover that the student had finally surpassed the teacher. But as Elena watched the city lights flicker like distant stars, a cold realization settled in her chest. Vincent Calloway hadn't survived 30 years in this business by surrendering quietly, and she was about to find out exactly how dangerous a cornered predator could become. The courtroom was packed 3 months later when Judge Margaret Chen read the verdict that would echo through Chicago's financial district for decades to come. On all 47 counts of securities fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering, her voice cut through the absolute silence, we find the defendant, Vincent Michael Calloway, guilty. Elena sat in the third row, wearing the same navy suit she'd bought for her first day at Goldman Sachs 8 years ago. Her hands remained steady as she watched Vincent's shoulders sag for the first time since she'd known him. No theatrical performance this time. No charming smile for the cameras. Just a broken man finally facing the weight of his crimes. The judge continued, her words measured and deliberate. "Mr. Calloway, you systematically defrauded investors of over $2 billion across multiple schemes spanning 15 years. You destroyed careers, bankrupted families, and corrupted the very institutions meant to protect honest investment. The evidence presented by Ms. Elena Rodriguez has painted a picture of calculated criminal enterprise that shocks the conscience of this court." Vincent turned slightly, his eyes finding Elena's across the crowded room. She didn't look away. After 3 years of hiding, of serving coffee to people who should have been her peers, she met his gaze with the steady confidence of someone who had reclaimed her name. "I sentence you to 40 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for 30 years. The gavel fell like thunder. Elena closed her eyes and allowed herself one moment to feel the weight lift from her shoulders. 3 years of carrying the burden of his betrayal, of questioning her own memories, of wondering if she'd ever be anything more than Elena Grant, the waitress who served coffee and kept her mouth shut. Now the world knew the truth. The media frenzy outside the courthouse was immediate and overwhelming. Reporters thrust microphones toward Elena as she descended the marble steps, their questions blending into an incomprehensible roar. "Ms. Rodriguez, how does it feel to have your name cleared? Will you be returning to finance? What's next for the woman who brought down Vincent Calloway?" She paused at the bottom of the steps, Richard Sterling appearing at her side like a protective guardian. Over the past months, as the investigation unfolded and the truth emerged, their relationship had transformed from employer and employee to something approaching mutual respect. "I have a brief statement," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly over the crowd. The reporters fell silent, cameras focusing on her face. 3 years ago, Vincent Calloway tried to erase me from the financial world. He thought that by destroying my reputation and forcing me into hiding, he could continue his criminal enterprise without consequence. She took a breath, feeling the October wind catch her hair. He was wrong. She looked directly into the nearest camera. "To the families and investors who lost everything because of his schemes, I want you to know that justice doesn't always come quickly, but it does come. And to anyone who thinks they can manipulate and destroy others without consequence, remember this moment." The questions erupted again as she walked away, but Elena had said everything she needed to say. 2 days later, she stood in the executive conference room of Sterling Investments, looking out at the Chicago skyline from the 52nd floor. The same view she'd admired from Vincent's office years ago, when she'd thought he was a mentor worth following. "The board approved your proposal unanimously," Richard said from behind her. "Head of Strategic Development, with full authority to restructure our risk management protocols." Elena turned from the window, a stack of papers in her hands. "These are my recommendations for the new compliance framework. Every transaction over $50 million requires dual authorization. All shell company investments need board approval. And we implement blockchain verification for all major transfers." Richard nodded, taking the documents. "You're essentially building a system that would have made Vincent's schemes impossible." "That's exactly what I'm building." Elena moved to the head of the conference table, the same spot where Daniel Sterling had mocked her months ago. "But there's something else we need to discuss." She opened her laptop and pulled up a series of financial reports. "Vincent may be in prison, but his network isn't completely dismantled. Patricia Hayes and Gerald Thompson were sentenced to 12 years each. But there are others, smaller players who enabled the system." Richard leaned forward, studying the screen. "What are you suggesting?" A comprehensive audit of every major investment firm in Chicago. We use Sterling's influence to push for industry-wide reforms. We make sure this never happens again, anywhere. That's going to make us some enemies." Elena smiled, the expression carrying none of the servile politeness she'd worn as a waitress. "Good. Let them know we're watching." Over the following weeks, Elena threw herself into the work of rebuilding not just her career, but an entire system. She hired a team of the brightest analysts she could find, many of them young women who reminded her of herself at 25, hungry and brilliant, and determined to change the world. She also kept her apartment in Lincoln Park, the small space where Elena Grant had learned to survive. Some evenings, she'd make coffee in the same chipped mug she'd used during her years in exile, remembering the woman who had served drinks and kept her brilliance hidden. That version of herself hadn't been weak, she realized now. She'd been preparing. 1 month after Vincent's sentencing, Elena received an unexpected visitor at her new office. Daniel Sterling knocked on her door, looking remarkably different from the arrogant young man who had laughed at her in the restaurant. "Ms. Rodriguez, I wondered if I could speak with you." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Of course." He sat down, clearly uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies, actually. For how I treated you at the restaurant, for not recognizing your intelligence, for being part of a system that almost destroyed you." Elena studied his face, seeing genuine remorse rather than calculated charm. "What changed your mind? Watching the trial? Understanding what you went through, what you sacrificed to bring the truth to light?" He met her eyes, and realizing that if I'd been paying attention instead of making jokes, I might have learned something. "You're learning now." "I am. I've been reading your compliance proposals, studying your analysis of the shell company networks. It's brilliant work." He paused. "I was wondering if you might consider taking on an intern. Someone who needs to understand how the financial world actually works, not just how it appears to work." Elena considered the request. Daniel Sterling represented everything she'd once envied about the financial world. Inherited connections, easy access to power, the assumption that success was a birthright rather than something earned through struggle and brilliance. But he also represented the possibility of change. "One condition," she said finally. "You start in the mailroom. 6 months of learning how information flows through an organization from the ground up. No family name, no special treatment. If you can handle that, we'll talk about an internship." Daniel nodded without hesitation. "When do I start?" "Monday morning, 7 a.m." As he left, Elena felt a satisfaction deeper than revenge. Vincent Calloway had tried to destroy her because he feared her intelligence, her integrity, her refusal to participate in his corruption. But his actions had ultimately created something more powerful than the brilliant analyst she'd once been. They had created a leader. That evening, Elena walked through Lincoln Park, past the coffee shop where she'd bought her first cup as Elena Grant 3 years ago. The owner waved at her through the window, and she waved back. Some connections were worth maintaining. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, her breath caught. Even with Vincent in prison, the instinct to fear his reach remained. But the message was from Marcus Chen, a former colleague from Goldman Sachs, who had testified at Vincent's trial. "Elena, saw the news about your new position. A group of us from the old days are starting an investment fund focused on ethical trading. Any chance we could buy you dinner and pick your brain about compliance frameworks? We want to do this right." She smiled, typing back quickly. "Name the time and place." As she walked home, Elena realized that Vincent Calloway's greatest miscalculation hadn't been underestimating her intelligence or her determination. It had been failing to understand that destroying someone's identity didn't erase their core nature. Elena Rodriguez had always been brilliant, analytical, and uncompromisingly honest. 3 years of hiding hadn't changed those fundamental qualities. They had only taught her patience, resilience, and the value of rebuilding from the ground up. Vincent had wanted to make her disappear. Instead, he had forced her to become stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. The irony was perfect, and Elena savored it as she climbed the steps to her apartment. Tomorrow she would continue the work of reforming an industry, of building systems that protected investors rather than predators. But tonight, she would make coffee in her chipped mug and remember the waitress who had served drinks while planning the downfall of one of Chicago's most powerful men. Both versions of herself deserved recognition. Both had played their part in this victory. As she reached her door, Elena paused and looked back toward the glittering towers of downtown Chicago. Somewhere in those buildings, other Vincent Callaways were probably planning their next schemes, confident in their untouchability. They had no idea what was coming for them. Elena Rodriguez was back, and she had learned exactly how dangerous a patient predator could become. The city lights flickered like distant stars, but this time they seemed to shine with promise rather than mockery. The hunt was far from over. It was just beginning. The dawn broke over Chicago 6 months later, painting the Sterling Tower in shades of gold that Elena had never noticed before. From her corner office on the 42nd floor, she could see the entire financial district spread below her like a chessboard, where she now knew every piece's true value. Her nameplate read, Elena Rodriguez, Chief Strategy Officer. But the reflection in the window showed someone who had traveled much further than the distance from the restaurant service corridor to the executive suite. The woman staring back had learned to carry both identities with equal grace. The brilliant analyst who could dissect billion-dollar frauds, and the patient observer who understood human nature from watching it unfold over countless cups of coffee. Vincent's trial had concluded 3 weeks ago. 40 years in federal prison, with Patricia Hayes and Gerald Thompson receiving their own sentences as cooperating witnesses. The Phoenix Holdings scheme had unraveled completely, revealing a network of corruption that stretched across 7 states and involved dozens of shell companies. The prosecution had called Elena's testimony devastating in its precision and a masterclass in financial forensics. But Vincent had one final card to play. The attack came on a Tuesday morning, delivered through a series of coordinated trades that bore his signature. Elegant, subtle, and designed to create maximum psychological impact. Even from his prison cell, Vincent had managed to activate sleeper accounts and trigger a cascade of short positions against Sterling investments, targeting the company's most vulnerable holdings with surgical precision. Elena's phone buzzed with alerts as Oracle Technologies' stock began its freefall. Within hours, Sterling's portfolio showed paper losses of nearly $200 million. Richard's voice cracked when he called her office, the fear evident despite his attempts at composure. "He's doing it," Richard said, his usual commanding tone replaced by something approaching panic. "He's actually trying to destroy us from prison." Elena leaned back in her chair, watching the numbers cascade across her multiple monitors. The irony wasn't lost on her. Vincent was using the same psychological warfare tactics he had employed 3 years ago, trying to make her feel helpless and cornered. But this time, she wasn't hiding behind a false identity or serving coffee to people who dismissed her intelligence. "Richard," she said calmly, "do you remember what I told you that night in the restaurant? About how predators reveal their patterns?" She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, waiting for reassurance that felt impossible, given the magnitude of their losses. "Vincent taught me everything he knows about market manipulation," Elena continued, pulling up a series of trading algorithms she had been developing for months. "But he never learned the most important lesson, that the student can eventually surpass the teacher." The counterattack began at 2:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Elena had spent 6 months studying Vincent's methods, not just from their past relationship, but from every trade he had ever executed through Phoenix Holdings. She understood his rhythm, his tells, and, most importantly, his arrogance. He couldn't resist creating patterns, even when attempting chaos. The Oracle Technologies manipulation had been designed to trigger panic selling across Sterling's entire tech portfolio. But Elena had anticipated this exact scenario, quietly building positions in defensive stocks while creating a complex web of derivative contracts that would activate only under specific market conditions, conditions that Vincent's attack was now providing. As Oracle's stock price plummeted past the predetermined trigger points, Elena's defensive positions began generating massive profits. More importantly, the derivative contracts started exercising automatically, creating a feedback loop that gradually reversed the downward pressure on Sterling's holdings. By market close, Sterling Investments had not only recovered its losses, but posted a net gain of $47 million. The financial press would later describe it as one of the most sophisticated defensive trading strategies ever executed in real time. But for Elena, sitting in her office as the sun set over Chicago, it represented something far more profound than profit margins and market manipulation. Vincent had tried to use her own trauma against her, assuming that the memory of her previous destruction would paralyze her ability to respond. Instead, she had transformed that trauma into expertise, turning every technique he had used to hurt her into a weapon for protecting what mattered. Her phone rang again. This time it was Agent Morrison from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. "Ms. Rodriguez, I wanted to inform you that we've traced the prison communications that enabled today's market activity. Vincent Calloway's commissary privileges have been revoked, and he's been moved to administrative segregation. He won't be orchestrating any more attacks." Elena thanked the agent and hung up, but she felt no satisfaction from Vincent's additional punishment. The victory hadn't come from his capture or imprisonment. It had come from discovering that she was no longer the person he could manipulate. Richard knocked on her door an hour later, his usual confidence restored but tempered with something that looked remarkably like respect. "I owe you an apology," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Not just for today, but for that night in the restaurant. For every assumption I made about who you were and what you were capable of." Elena considered his words carefully. The old Elena, both the brilliant analyst and the defensive waitress, might have accepted the apology with either pride or resentment. But the woman she had become understood that acknowledgement was only meaningful when it led to genuine change. "Richard, do you know why I chose to stay at Sterling instead of starting my own firm?" He shook his head, clearly having assumed it was about the resources and stability that his company could provide. "Because this company gave me a chance to prove that intelligence and integrity don't have to be mutually exclusive. Vincent taught me that brilliant people often become corrupt because they believe their abilities exempt them from consequences. But working here, seeing how you changed your approach after learning the truth, showed me that power can actually amplify honesty instead of destroying it." Richard was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the implications of her statement. "What happens now?" he asked finally. Elena turned to look out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. Somewhere out there, people were finishing their shifts at restaurants and coffee shops, carrying dreams and capabilities that their circumstances might never reveal. Others were sitting in boardrooms, making decisions that would affect thousands of lives, wielding influence that demanded wisdom they might not possess. "Now we build something better," she said. "Sterling Investments becomes the firm that proves you can generate exceptional returns without compromising ethical standards. We create opportunities for people whose talents might otherwise go unrecognized. We remember that financial markets exist to serve human purposes, not the other way around." Richard nodded slowly, and Elena could see him processing not just her words, but the fundamental shift they represented in how the company would operate going forward. After he left, Elena remained at her desk, not working but simply existing in the space she had created for herself. The transformation felt complete in ways that transcended the obvious markers of success. She wasn't the woman who had been destroyed by Vincent's betrayal, nor was she the person who had hidden behind a false identity while serving coffee. She had become someone new, someone who carried the wisdom of both experiences without being defined by either trauma or triumph. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted message from an address she didn't recognize. For a moment, the old wariness flickered through her, but when she opened it, she found something unexpected. The message contained a single paragraph and a phone number. Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Sarah Chen, and I'm currently working as a night shift data entry clerk at Morrison Financial. I have a master's degree in quantitative analysis and have identified what I believe to be a significant pattern of algorithmic trading irregularities in my company's client portfolios. I don't know who else to contact, but I read about your testimony in the Callaway case, and I was hoping you might be willing to listen to what I've discovered. I understand if you're too busy, but I thought it was worth asking. Elena stared at the message for several minutes, remembering the isolation she had felt during her own discovery of Vincent's fraud, the desperate need for someone to believe in both her analysis and her integrity, the particular loneliness of possessing crucial information that no one would take seriously because of assumptions about her position or capabilities. She picked up her phone and dialed Sarah's number. Sarah, this is Elena Rodriguez. I got your message, and I'd like to hear what you've found. Are you available to meet tomorrow morning? The relief in Sarah's voice was immediate and profound, carrying echoes of Elena's own journey from invisibility to recognition. As Elena scheduled the meeting and hung up the phone, she realized that the cycle she had been part of, brilliant person discovers fraud, gets silenced by powerful interests, fights to restore reputation, didn't have to continue indefinitely. Instead of being trapped in repetition, she could transform the pattern entirely. Sterling Investments would become the place where Sarah Chens could bring their discoveries without fear of retaliation, where intelligence was valued regardless of the wrapper it came in, where the next Vincent Callaway would find their corruption exposed by a network of analysts who understood that their greatest protection came from supporting each other. Elena Rodriguez had begun as a victim, survived as Elena Grant, and emerged as someone entirely new, a person who had learned to use power in service of justice rather than personal vindication. The city lights below sparkled with the same intensity as always, but they no longer seemed distant or mocking. They looked like possibilities waiting to be discovered, like the illuminated windows of lives that might intersect in unexpected ways, creating opportunities for both revelation and redemption. She gathered her things and prepared to leave the office, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but confident in her ability to meet them. The hunt that had begun with Vincent's betrayal had ended with something far more valuable than revenge. It had resulted in the discovery of who she truly was when all the external definitions fell away. Elena Rodriguez was ready for whatever came next.